Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. And today we're getting into another one of the series of topics in regards to finances from the perspective of men and women. This one is from the perspective of men, and this question is in regards to redefining the provider identity in a dual income reality. So essentially, this is talking about having requiring two incomes in a household and what that means in terms of for men, especially from the age of 20 to 40, what it means as far as being a provider. So the economy survival, don't mind that I'm reading some of the my points I have on my computer, so bear with me. The economy survival costs make two household incomes a necessity at this point. And pretty much the topic of discussion is men are trying to understand what it means to be a provider in this day and age when your partner earns equal or more than you. This creates a shift in the old school dynamic of the household balance. So essentially, for a lot of guys, traditionally speaking, would assume that my role as the provider means bringing the money. And it's not to say that that's the only weight that you have when it comes to that, because the truth is that there are a lot of things that just kind of go hand in hand with that, which is the leadership qualities. Because when you are a provider, you're also figuring out the financial goals of the household. So you then adopt the leadership role because you need guidance. You need the house to follow your, how should I say, where you're taking things, so that way financially you can make better financial decisions, including maybe like budgets for the home, what we can spend on, say, vacation or fun versus what we have to spend on savings, what we have to spend on the bills, and then also to what we would spend on, say, the children or whatever the case is when you have children. So this brings in that kind of dynamic, but that all comes from bringing in the primary amount of money, finances into the household, and having that kind of really say so in regards to the dynamic of, like I said, what follows is where you're going to take things. This now brings into discussion of if two people, being that we're in a space now in society where you usually requires two incomes to survive, or to thrive, to bring things to the next level, as far as not just kind of getting by, but actually like having more. Excuse me, sorry. It brings in, sorry about that, you guys. It brings in to play what your role is, you know what I mean? So then it kind of puts a halt on, let's say, to give an example, decision making. If you are like, okay, as a man, we should be saving. If traditionally, if you were making more money and your idea would be, we need to be saving because we need to do X, Y, and Z. If your partner now is making the same amount of money, and maybe they say, okay, cool, well, I don't want to save because I make my own money. So cool, I'm going to do with my money, and whatever the case is, you could do with your money. And I'm just using this as an example. It takes away the idea of the provider, which then proceeds to things like leadership roles in terms of what's, normally the common understanding of things. So it says key points in discussion: disconnecting income output from masculine identity, and how to structure household finances equitably without relying on outdated generational defaults. Sorry about that. So disconnecting your income output in relation to your masculinity, for a lot of people, that is directly tied to that as a provider. And the actionable angle in regards to, or the resolution, it says moving away from a rigid 50-50 split towards income weighted contribution models for fostering long-term relationship equity and reducing financial resentment. I'm going to tell you why I don't necessarily, first, just addressing that the topic of discussion itself is a real thing. And it's something that has taken place in this modern day now, more so than ever in probably the last like 20 years or so, maybe even longer. And I'm going to tell you why disconnecting your income to masculinity is hard for a lot of people, because of the fact that generally a lot of people are raised on that tradition of, this is what it means. This is what we do. We bring in the money as men. They bring in the money, and that validates that they are a man. You know what I mean? There's so many things that come along with it. It's not just that, but for men, that is the bread and butter in their masculinity. Very similar to, for a woman, you would probably say that raising the children, you know what I mean, is and nurturing them is a high aspect of their femininity, you know what I mean. So taking that away from men is almost taking that away from women. Or even when it comes to a woman who may pamper a man in a certain way, like maybe like I made his lunch, I schedule some of his appointments. Some of that for a woman, if that was taken away from them, might feel like you're taking away my bread and butter to being a woman. So for men, it's hard to disconnect that, because the provider aspect, along with obviously the protector aspect and the leadership aspect, go hand in hand with it. But a lot of those things come with the provider aspect. The provider aspect is almost the backbone of protection and leadership, because the protection, not so much in the physical immediate need of protecting, that is, or self-explanatory, that's separate. But protecting in the sense like we have a house to stay, that we have a roof over our head, that the feeling of I'm protecting you with a roof over your head comes from the providership. The leadership quality also comes from, if I am providing and I'm also learning the ways to provide better, in terms of I got to learn how to invest, I got to learn long-term providing, not just short-term providing. Long-term providing means learning how to invest, learning how to create generational wealth, learning to make sure that when we get to the age of 60 something, 70, or whatever the case is, we're good for the rest of our life. Our kids have a jump start as well. And also too, getting to a point of saying, well, we don't have to retire at 65. Let's retire at 40. That is part of the leadership. Creating that foundation is part of the leadership. So taking that away from the masculinity, I don't think is something that a lot of people can do or necessarily should do. That is something that is, like I said, one of the, as they list here, the key discussion points is as far as men trying to navigate that in their mind. But I don't think necessarily that getting away from that is necessarily the answer, as far as when I dive my own opinion into this. And as far as moving away from the rigid 50-50 split towards income, it says weighted contribution models to foster long-term relationship and reduce financial resentment. I think that the only answer to that, probably, if two people are making somewhat similar income, or maybe even the woman's making more income, and this is where things get really hard, is the leadership aspect now has to take over, independent of the provider aspect in terms of being the financial breadwinner. And what happens in that dynamic is the man would then say, I have a plan, and with that plan, I need to be in charge of the finances. That is probably the only way. I know this is controversial. It's probably the only way for that. This is from the, keep in mind, this topic is a topic discussion from what is on the mind of men. So bear with that it's coming from the perspective of men. So it's not coming from the perspective of women dealing with this issue. This is an issue that men are dealing with. So for that reason, I would say that men need to have the perspective and the mindset of, I'm going to use the leadership quality to overcome the provider aspect by saying, listen, I am going to be in charge of the finances. This is my plan. I'm going to pool the money together. I'm going to distribute it in these ways. And if they show that as a leader, what they're saying in their plan makes sense, then they can be in charge of that and make a budget and make a plan. Now, this obviously requires to be with somebody a woman who understands that plan and is not swept up in the way of today's modern society, where they go, I don't want the man being the leader of this relationship. I don't want traditional. This idea of being with somebody who makes your equal income doesn't work for a man who's dealing with this topic in their mind if you are with someone who doesn't want to follow your leadership. It doesn't work, because then you're going to still have this issue on your mind. And like I said, the topic of the discussion is this issue being on the man's mind and trying to deal with this. It's an issue where I don't think the answer necessarily is that you both try to be on an equal playing field for the purpose of the man submitting to the woman if this is not that kind of man. But if this is that kind of man who doesn't mind, quote unquote, submitting to the woman, and I'm going to get into that in a moment in terms of why that may not work, then in that case, it doesn't matter that his finances are equal or even less than. But then that means that the woman has to be honest with herself to say she wants a guy who is not in that type of dynamic. Now, I recently did a video in regards to in the dating world in terms of a man being more in his softer energy versus his masculine energy, and how understand that though you might have some people who want to say, okay, I want that we both make good money and it's good. A lot of times it doesn't necessarily work because a lot of people still fall back on the traditional ways as being what they want, even though they want the benefits of the modern world, but they don't want necessarily the negatives that come with it. And so with that, I would honestly say, I think there's a lot of aspects that don't work with this dynamic. Most people's solution just says that if a woman makes a certain amount of money, she needs to be with a man who makes more money. One problem with that when it comes to that dynamic is that there aren't a lot of, excuse me guys for the whole kind of raspy throat right now and kind of getting over something. A lot of, there aren't a lot of men nowadays, as many as you think, that make more than women. Most of the time they make about the same amount this day and age. I know a lot of people will say that that's not true, whatever the case is, but for the most part, it is becoming a thing that is really very much real. And so this is a dynamic that I get why it plagues a lot of guys. It definitely changes that dynamic of their value in the relationship sometimes, because now they're less respected, like as they talk about here, having resentment. Sometimes that can come from the place of not being respected. So it all depends. And this is, like I said, a topic coming from the dynamic of men. Hopefully the words that I said will help for those who this topic is something that they're dealing with. But I definitely think it's something where you're going to have to explore and kind of figure out the dynamic of the relationship. Because like I said, all this stuff ties back in the day. I'm going to say this for all the next upcoming videos in regards to finances. It all ties back to the dating world or that space regardless. And I will say that you have to be one with deciding or figuring out how you feel in regards to what you're looking for in a dynamic in the first place. So when these topics come up, like how is it going to be resolved? So that's really one thing, a major thing to think of. Like I said before, put your comments down below. If you guys want to expand on any kind of topics, I would love to entertain any kind of topics you guys want to jump into. Doing these type of questions right now or addressing these kind of hot issues or hot discussions or current discussions or whatever you want to call it, is so we can kind of get things going in terms of like the chat. So that way I can start making more videos addressing the things that you guys want answered, so we can try to like solve some of the issues that you guys might have, make a general discussion on it. And that way a lot of people in the comments can help others who are dealing with these same kind of issues, various issues, and try to help kind of bring this all into one place. Because like we always said before, from the inception of this channel, it's about positivity and us trying to figure out ways to help everybody and just bring positivity to everybody's space. So as always, you guys, like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.